Welcome to Library in Lagniappe, a production of Metro 21 and the East Baton Rouge Parish Library. I'm Kim Harold, Head of Public Relations for the library system. Throughout the year, nationally recognized authors visit the East Baton Rouge Parish Library to discuss their works and share their talent with our patrons. In August, Ronlyn Domingue will discuss her debut novel, The Mercy of Thin Air, at the library. Set in New Orleans in the late 1920s, The Mercy of Thin Air explores the life and death of Rosie Nolan, alternating between the past and present. Rosie finds herself between neither living nor dead. From this ghostly perspective, Rosie recalls the story of her own life and explores the lives of Amy and Scott, a young married couple whose house she haunts almost 75 years after her own death. Here to discuss this amazing and intriguing novel is author Ronlyn Domingue. Ronlyn, thank you for being here today.
Thanks for the invitation, Kim. I appreciate it.
Can you give us a brief synopsis of your novel, The Mercy of Thin Air?
Well, you did a fabulous job to start with, so I'll probably just add a few more details to it. The Mercy of Thin Air is, as you stated, set in 1920s New Orleans in present-day Louisiana, and it's about Rosie Nolan, who is an aspiring doctor on her way to medical school and in the middle of a magnificent love affair when she drowns suddenly in an accident, in fact, in her beau's pool. And because Rosie is a scientist at heart, she doesn't believe in an afterlife, so she doesn't go. And she stays between this life and whatever comes next in a ghost-like state, although she'd never call herself a ghost, for about 75 years. And at that point, she becomes entwined in the life of Amy and Scott, a young couple whose history mirrors her own in rather significant ways. And as it turns out, there are deep connections between Amy and Rosie, which she did not know at the time. And it's through Rosie's intervention in Amy and Scott's relationship that she decides to find out what happened to her lost love, Andrew, as well as confront the nature of her very existence.
Okay, and it's pretty appropriate with all the supernatural TV shows that are out right now, too.
Yeah, the timing seems quite good, actually. I'm not sure what contributes to the fact that people seem very interested in these matters right now, but I guess the timing worked out well for my novel.
Right. So what stood out most for you in your book? Do you have a favorite part?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think in terms of writing the book, the character Rosie herself is what stands out with such power. I have to say that in writing this novel, she was the driving force. If it weren't for her character, I'm not sure that the novel would have turned out quite the same way. I often talk of her revealing herself to me, and as the other characters did, as opposed to my crafting them. It's like they are already there, and it's a matter of me just getting it down. A favorite part? Whew, that's tough. Let me think about that for a second. I really like the scene when Rosie and Andrew first meet. I think that's a little sassy, a little clever, and really gets to the heart of both of them. There's a scene toward the beginning of the novel when Rosie is taking a 3-year-old who's between, just like herself, but the child doesn't know she's dead, to help her. That was a really creepy scene to write. I didn't expect that one. And as difficult as it was to write, and it's a scene I will never read aloud, of course, maybe never say never, but the scene toward the end when Andrew, Rosie's beau, and Rosie's father, Barrett, see each other for what turns out to be the last time, that was one of the most difficult scenes I ever had to write, and I think it's just one of the most emotionally powerful in there.
Do you feel emotionally connected to this book?
Oh, very much so. When you live with something for years of your life, and the people who are in the book are not real to anyone else but you, you can't help but have that emotional connection because you're with them constantly. They're waking you up in the middle of the night, or you're trying to do something during the day, and suddenly, you know, one of them's like, "You need to pay attention to me right now. We need to have a little chat, or I need to reveal something," and that's how it goes.
Okay, so what do you think would have happened in the story if Rosie would not have died? Would she have gone on to be a doctor, or do you think she would have chosen a life in marriage and motherhood and that kind of thing?
It's a complicated question, because I think for readers who read The Mercy of Thin Air, it's clear that Rosie was headstrong and determined. There's no doubt in my mind that she would have pursued a medical career because that was her true passion. But so was Andrew. And I think had she lived, I like to believe that the two of them could have negotiated that between them, because what Andrew loved so much about Rosie was the fact that she was independent and strong, and to dissuade that in any way or to squelch that in any way would have made her not Rosie anymore.
Right. Okay, so what inspired you to write The Mercy of Thin Air, and how long did it take you to write it?
The inspiration came many years ago. In fact, when I first got out of college, my first real job was with a management consulting firm, and I was responsible for keeping track of a team of 20 men, which I have to say was one of the best jobs I ever had, and I loved it, and I'm still in touch with some of those guys today. But having a 20-person team with so much responsibility, you can't help but lose your patience now and then. And there was one occasion where one of the guys came up to me and he asked for something, and he just tested me to my limit, and I said, you know what, if you don't stop bugging me, I'm going to die and come back and poltergeist you.
Oh, wow.
And he just looked at me like I'd lost my mind. But in that moment, I thought, well, what would that be like, to be dead and to be able to wreak havoc and no one know this?
Right.
And so for many years, that idea sat with me. I thought of it, always conceptualized this as a novel, but there was no place to the story, and there was no gender to the character. And it wasn't until I got serious about my writing again in my late 20s and had to write a story to begin with for a short story writing class that I took, because this was a short story first. That's when Rosie's character revealed itself. And there she was. And in terms of how long it took me to write it, from the actual research and writing time, concentrated time, that was 4 years. But if you go back to the genesis of the idea, I think we're looking at about 13 years ago.
Wow. So I read on your website that you came up with Rosie's name while you were driving home from work one day. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. I have a superstition about my characters. They can't develop very quickly unless they're named. And I knew certain things about Rosie as her character started to come to me. She was dead. She had blonde hair and green eyes. And you see her blonde hair here. She was the daughter of a suffragette. And that's about all I knew about her. No name, nothing else. And one day, I was driving home from work, and don't take this too literally, because I don't mean I actually heard a voice in my head.
No, I like this kind of
stuff. But
it
was almost, there was a voice in my head, and it said, my name is Rosiella. And I was sitting there at the light with my little hands on the steering wheel, and, okay, your name's Rosiella. And from then on, I knew who I was dealing with, and she was just as impatient and sometimes hard to deal with as she reveals herself in this book.
Right. Okay, this is your first novel.
That's correct.
So it has become nationally recognized since its original publishing date in September 2005. Is
That's
that right?
correct.
Okay, can you tell us where, other than the United States, has this book been published?
Oh, I got a trivia question. Okay, let me see. It's been picked up in 11 different countries, and for a first novel, that's relatively unheard of. I mean, that's usually Germany and the UK, that's pretty common, but the other countries, that's unusual. Okay, let me see. The ones where it's been published: Germany, the UK, the Netherlands, Portugal, Sweden, and I think that's it that are out. And then for the ones that are forthcoming, and you could go to my website, ronlyndomingue.com, and I have the list. Forthcoming: Japan, China, Norway, France, and there's like one or two others. Poland's in there. So yeah, I mean, I lose track because all of a sudden I have this list, so I need to get a little better at this and remembering, but
no,
they just
that's
stack
just amazing.
up.
I mean, how do you feel about that? Are you just elated?
Oh, it's bizarre. It's completely bizarre. My Italian publisher released the book in May, and they invited me to go to Milan for the book launch. I'd never been overseas before, and so I spent this wonderful week in Milan just enjoying the city and the people and, of course, the food. And you know, for a South Louisiana girl, I was born in Baton Rouge but raised in Lafayette. I mean, who could have ever guessed that this would have happened?
Right. Well, that's amazing.
It's totally amazing.
So how does your book compare or relate to The Lovely Bones and The Time Traveler's Wife? I've read a lot of reviews that kind of compare, you know, your book to those. How does it compare?
Well, I think for The Lovely Bones, because the narrator in my novel, as well as in Alice Sebold's novel, they're both dead, I think that's the obvious comparison.
Right.
But I think my book is really more like The Time Traveler's Wife in that it does shift in time periods, because The Mercy of Thin Air takes place primarily in 1920s New Orleans, between, which is chronological time as we experience, and Rosie does, but she's dead, and then present-day Louisiana. And for those who've read The Time Traveler's Wife, they know that Henry and Claire are at any age at any given time throughout the course of that. But what also compares to it is the deep love story. So Rosie and Andrew, that's one strand, and then Amy and Scott, that's another one. So we have two parallel love stories going through this, converging at different points. So I think it's far more like Audrey Effenegger's book.
Right. Okay, so since this book is so good and nationally recognized, have you decided on what you're going to do for your next book?
Yes, I'm really glad that I know what the second one will be. I have a sense of what the third one will be, and maybe the fourth one. So I feel like I have a few years of not freaking out over the fact that I have no clue what I'm going to write for my next book. But for the second novel, that too started as a short story, which I wrote when I was in graduate school. Charlie has been living in my head since about 2001, and the major issues I'll be researching in this book, well, this one I researched quantum physics to figure out what Rosie was. Nobody's getting a science lesson, but I had to understand her.
Right.
The South in the 1920s, the women's rights movement, so there's a lot of research that went into this book. The next one, I will be researching the Vietnam War, urban development, and ecology, and who knows what else will come up. So it's a different book in terms of subject matter, but common themes, and I'm really excited about focusing on the next book now that the hardcover and the paperback have run its course for this one.
Well, great. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
And patrons may find out more about this brilliant new novel as Ronlyn appears at the main library on Sunday, August 13th at 3 p.m. The Mercy of Thin Air will be available for purchase, and there will be a book signing after the program. So we look forward to seeing you there. We'll be right back with information on the annual genealogy conference. You're watching Library Lagniappe.